Okay, great. Can you hear me?
No, you just speak into the microphone for a second.
This one?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. All right, so I'm welcoming Dottie Potochnick, who knows our church very well, and we know her very well. And I'm going to let her tell you her story. But she recommended or suggested to me that I reach out to the Presbyterian Church in Schenectady. Schenectady Press, is that the name? First Press, Schenectady. And they have a historian. So we have a history, I think it might be on the website, I'm not sure. I have it if we want to put it on. But they sent me some information that was a little different, and I just thought it was so interesting. We have its roots, as most of you know, in the Italian mission started by First Press in the early years of the 20th century. In the fall of '03, the Young People's Association, called Christian Endeavor, asked Dr. Stevenson, who was their pastor, to suggest some practical and useful Christian work that they might undertake. They were advised that something could be done for the large number of Italian immigrants coming into the city, who we learned were not really embraced by the Catholic Church, even though they were Catholic. I guess the immigrants weren't part of their community. We are a mission church. That's how we started out. They presented the plan to session, endorsed the work. An executive board of 6 men and 4 women, which probably was unusual, was appointed to oversee the work, which came to be part of the cellar at 228 Front Street. There were sewing, cooking, and phys ed classes, education classes, English classes, Christian service on Thursday night, Sunday school, and a preaching service on Sunday. And this went on for many years and moved around, Front Street to River Street to Park Place to the Villa Road Chapel on Broadway. And finally, the mission found a permanent home in 1920 when the old Congregational Church on J Street, opposite the post office block near Union Street, was purchased. By 1926, the work in the Mount Pleasant area had progressed as to warrant permanent headquarters, a chapel on Webster Street. So that's some of the early history. I'm going to give this to Wayne to put on the website, maybe put it in a newsletter too. And I'll just let you take it from there, what your experience was in Trinity. And your famous father. Okay.
We came here from Detroit, Michigan in 1946, and Dad was called to the church that was on J Street. And he was called because he was bilingual, and that is what the church was. Somebody had to talk to the Italians in their own language. And he had a sermon on Sunday, and he would have an Italian sermon. And I don't speak Italian, but I sure understand it, and it's just from that experience of listening to a sermon in Italian. It was an interesting building. It was an old building, had been Lund, some of you, if you do history, was a mayor of Schenectady, and that was his church. And it was a very high church at the time. I remember it vividly because the front had a fence, and hollyhocks grew all along the fence. Now, that's a very strange thing to grow, but they were lovely. They were colorful and beautiful. I can remember some Sundays when there were no flowers up front. My dad would go and cut down the hollyhocks, and I still remember he'd have a hammer, and he'd hammer the base of the stem because he just wanted them to stay alive, and they didn't need water, but they looked lovely. But he did that often because he wanted it to look beautiful. I was sitting here and realizing that the furniture behind me came from that building. So that's something you ought to know. It's been around a long time, a long time. The seats have been recovered many times on the chairs, but it's a lovely thing. Also, the baptismal font goes way back then. And it's kind of interesting when you sit here and you've been that far back and you know where things started to see them all here, because kind of it makes me feel warm. We were in that building, as I say, we moved here in 46. I don't have in my mind a year when all of this began, but I remember when my dad, we would talk at the dinner table, I was a teenager then, that there was no room for that church to grow. There was no neighborhood to grow from. A few people in the neighborhood would come to the church, but it had a, I'm going to say stigma, that it was an Italian church. So that wasn't good. And he said, you know, this church, in order to grow, needs to be somewhere else. And he used to get in his car, and he'd go out and drive around. I don't know, he went everywhere. He came home one day, and he said, I found it. I said, what'd you find? He said, a perfect place for a church. And I said, where is it? And he said, Swaggertown and Baldwin Road. But it was, they had pine trees planted all the way up, and they were in very direct order. They had been planted by Boy Scouts. And he didn't know if that was to be a forever wild or something like that. So he said, I have to do a lot of investigating. And he went to the Boy Scout Association and a lot of places. And they said, no, it's not forever wild. It can be purchased. So they began to purchase the land. Now, you got to realize that in those days, this was not an independent church. It was a mission of First Presbyterian Church. And if you went to First Presbyterian Church at all, they had a great mission outreach. And at the front of their bulletin listed all the missionaries all over the world. But at the bottom was Frank Carabini, and it was the mission to Trinity. It used to, did I say this, used to be called San Salvatore way back when? San Salvatore. And if you were to go to do some history, look up, that would be where you would first look. And it was an interesting thing because there were a lot of things you had to go to presbytery, you had to go to synod, you had to go to everybody to make sure it would be legal to move the church. And it was people, as I said, from First Presbyterian Church. There was also one man on that board from Union Presbyterian Church. And I remember him because he was in charge of keeping the family happy. T.W. Gordon was his name, and he'd come into our house a lot. One of the interesting things was when we moved here, the church did not own a manse. When we came from Michigan, the church had a house, and that was the house my mother moved into. I'm getting dry here. What happened was that my mother just thought, well, what do we do? You know, I'm used to living in the manse. So she kind of got pushy and said, you really need to buy a house. We lived on Michigan Avenue in a rental that belonged to one of the members of the church. Tony Vertucci owned the house. So he said, move into the house. So we lived there for the year. But in the meantime, my mother would go around with some of the elders. And she'd come home and she'd say, I don't know what they expect me to live in. Those houses are so junky. And I thought, Mom, it's what they can afford. Well, she finally found the house on Bradley Street, 1572, and the church did buy it. And it did it this way. My dad was given a housing allowance, and that's what he used for rent. But he said, I think you ought to take that housing allowance and use it for a mortgage payment and buy a house. So the church did that. The only problem with that was when he retired, he didn't have a house. It belonged to the church. And Dick Feet was coming as pastor, and Dick Feet didn't want to live in a manse. He wanted to buy his own house, which he bought in Harlow Gardens. I don't know if any of you were here back then when he was here. First pastor.
People listening probably have.
Yeah, and it was just an interesting thing. But what I'm just trying to think in terms of progression here. Well, I think, okay, I'll dwell on this building now. And by the way, I need to go back. I have not been a continuous member here. Thank you, dear. Perfect, thank you. I have not been a continuous member here because I've moved out of the area. I remember going to Knoxville, Tennessee. My former husband was in the FBI, and we moved around. we went to Knoxville, Tennessee, and I worshiped in a church. And when the pastor said, you should be joining, I said, oh, I can't do that. I have a church in Schenectady, and I'm going to stay there. And he said, if you do that every time you move, you'll never put your roots down. And I thought, that man is right. I didn't join that church, but subsequently we were in Falls Church, Virginia. I belonged to a church there, and it just kind of the way my life went. But I think I'm just trying to think now in terms of being here. I'm just trying to put my years on it. I can't. So, yeah. But one of the big missions of this church at that time was Trinity under the Pines. And some of you may have been here. It was a Bible school. And it was unique, and it was a big outreach to the community. They did charge a registration fee because the crafts and things they did, like they did leather work, they did ceramics, they did things where the materials would cost money. But the people in this neighborhood, I remember people from Willow Glen, Glen Oaks, would come to the summer Bible school called Trinity Under the Pines. And there used to be just up the hill there a lean-to. Is it still there? A little? No, I don't. Because at Trinity Under the Pines, that's where the music program was. And I did the music program. I don't know how I think my sister, who was in charge of Trinity Under the Pines, said, you're going to do it. That was it. But it was just a really nice thing to reach out to the community, bring people in. The teachers were members of the church, but otherwise it was. And where am I going now? I wanted to say something else about the music. Oh, in terms of that, at one time in my life here in the church, I played the organ. And it was a Baldwin electronic organ. It's not that organ. That's a big one. And it was my speed. I'm not an accomplished concert pianist, but I recently came across the music. I have a thing in my living room that has drawers and it has music. And I would write in pencil all the stops I was going to use and where they had to change. And I thought, that was nervy, that I thought I could. But it worked, And occasionally I still play the piano, but that's my own entertainment. The church was then just this building and that thing there, the whole education building, thank you, wasn't there at the time. And it's an interesting thing because I remember how Sunday school classes were held. I don't even think the Pride Room was there at the time. No, it wasn't. But how every inch of this building was used. I was looking up there. They used to store all the Christmas decorations up there. They still do. Well, there you go. And but it was very interesting to see how the church moved. You've probably heard the story, and I'm not going to get it straight, about how the kitchen got done. And maybe some of you have been here long enough to know Gilda Rodriguez and Louise DeLapp. Yeah. They were in the women's group at the time, and it was just a bunch of people, and it wasn't just them. It was some of the older women. And one lady said, well, I'm giving $5, and she put $5 down. And they began collecting money enough to equip the kitchen, which is really a very nice kitchen. I know it has some limitations, but it's a nice kitchen, the way it's set up. I've always been impressed with it. Okay, here we go. What else?
How was the money raised for the church?
I'm not sure, but I know that some of it did come from the presbytery, because when they had money was left to the presbytery. Presbyterians are good that way. When they die, they leave a lot of money to the church, and there it was. I have to almost apologize for when I was coming back here. I had 3 young children, and I knew I was going to be getting a divorce, and I did not come back here. I went to Union Press because I figured it might be a difficult thing for me coming here. My former husband was a trustee of the church, that's where I ended up going to church. And it kind of, when everything happened at Union Presbyterian Church, they decided they had to move. They just could not exist. And I always tell people it wasn't because of money, it was because of people, because they had over $1 million in a foundation. because Presbyterians left money to their church. So that church moved down to First Reform, and I thought, that's not where I belong. I belong here, and that's when I came back, and I don't even remember now how many years ago, but I came back in my membership here. But this is just, it's a place you drive by, and it's so pretty to look at, and it's, you know, it has a lot of good memories, and I just admire all of you so much because you've worked hard to keep it where it is, you know, and you have co-pastors that have been just terrific people, and Tim comes to visit me regularly at the Kingsway Village where I live now, and it's just, it's good. And I love your theme, do justice, love kindness, walk humbly with God. It's where we belong. I don't know, I'm jumping around, I'm sorry. If anybody has a question, you know, you're thinking of something that maybe you, Rick, are you going to say something? You bent your head like you were going to say something. No. No, I don't mean to put you on the spot. But I'm just thinking, when we came here, I'm one of 4 girls. My oldest sister had married already. She had finished college, and she stayed in Michigan. And then the 3 of us came here. And I was the one that was home the longest. I went to college at Albany State, is what they called it. It wasn't SUNY Albany. And I commuted. I remember doing that. One of my sisters was engaged to be married at 19. I don't know how my parents said yes to getting married so young, but she got married, and we had to go back to Michigan for that. And my sister Lydia was married in the manse. She and her husband, he was a GE engineer, decided that they wanted to be married, and they just had my sister's big wedding in Michigan. So they said, we'll just make it a quiet little family affair. So she was married at 1572 Bradley Street. So she'll have that memory every time she drives back. By the way, aging is something. I said I hit the big 90 in March. My sister Lydia still lives in her own home in Indian Hills, and she's 99. So I have a sister Ellen who lives in Florida, and she's 94. So we're going to be around for a long time. Good genes. And my dad was 97 when he died. My mom 96. So I don't know what it is.
You got good genes.
Good genes. I don't know. Oh well. I have, well, it's a picture, I think, it's on a wall here someplace, too.
I've got the website open. There's a whole bunch of pictures that we have. This is, you can see the church.
Sure, okay.
Coming up.
Oh, the interesting thing about the church being built, the memory I have, there was a lawyer. They needed a lot of legal work being done, and he was Jewish. Hartheimer, I think his name was, from Albany, and I don't really know how he became the lawyer, except maybe it was through the presbytery, which was Albany Presbytery, so their offices were always somewhere over there. Yeah. But it was interesting, and he just was fascinated. He loved the idea that he could be a lawyer for a Protestant church, you know, and he was very, very instrumental in knowing that everything could be done right, and you know. Yeah. So that really, he was a good guy.
Just a quick question. Is that your father?
Whoopsie-doo.
I think it's in the dedication.
Yes, he has must be a Bible in his hands. Yeah. Okay, yeah, and I'm trying to think. I can't see who's behind him, I'm sorry. But I think they were guests. You know, the presbytery sent guests, and it's a...
Yeah, if you go to the website and look under who we are, drop things, history, you'll see it's described in there's a bunch of old pictures.
I remember at the time, Baldwin Drums, who was developing Indian Hills, lived the first house along, there's that road right off here, off the parking lot. He lived in that house. And somehow, he wanted to build this church. He wanted to be the contractor to do it. And so he made a lot of deals, I think, and it made it affordable and what have you. So he was the contractor when this church was built. Baldwin Drums. And he was the developer of Indian Hills. Sure, exactly. Yep.
Interesting.
Yep.
A drum, like in drum? Or drum?
Tom's Road? Yeah, I'm not being that accurate. But, yeah, I remember when the church was being built, and we asked where the money came from. People made pledges. I remember doing that myself. And they were 3-year pledges, as I recall. Certainly it wasn't enough to build a church because we were not people of means, you know. We were good, basic Italian people, and a lot of the men worked in the factories there and so on. I want to mention, too, that the Mount Pleasant Chapel, this was not the only building, or the building, let's say, on J Street. There is a chapel on Webster Street in Mount Pleasant, and that building is still there, is my understanding, and it's like apartment house now. But it's just a white clapboard building, and they used to hold things there on Wednesdays, and then always in the summer, it's crazy, they would have outdoor movies at night.
Oh, my goodness.
You know, like King of Kings or something, where there were religious movies based that way, and the people in the neighborhood came. So it was, again, an outreach. I have to say this. My first teaching job in Schenectady was at Hamilton School, which is right the next block. And somebody told me recently that they were told, they were Catholic kids and they had grown up in the neighborhood. They were told by the Mother Superior of their building, when you walk past that building, don't you look at it. You hold your hand up here. And I said to my friend Eleanor Califano, oh, Eleanor, she didn't say it. She said, yes, she did. You hold your hand like this and don't you look at that building.
Because they were Catholic.
Because they were Catholic, and that was a Protestant building. But it had a big lot next to it. So when, I haven't driven by in a long time, but it's near 7th Avenue, I think, and Webster Street. And it's the only, there is a brick building on the corner that belongs to Mount Carmel Church, I think. But so that's kind of an interesting thing to go back and look. And there were a lot of things done like that, movies to ice cream socials, I remember that. Again, in that neighborhood, tried to draw some of the people to join. The people who lived in that, our members who lived in that neighborhood, had a difficult time because being Protestant in a Catholic neighborhood was difficult for them. And some of them had family that had remained Catholic, and so they were kind of put upon by their families. But they stuck it out. They were committed to their faith, and I still remember. And you asked how the money came. I still remember there was a Mrs. Alcino, and she owned a lot of properties. I don't know. And we used to say, where'd she get the money to buy those buildings? But she owned a lot of properties, and when she died, money was given to the church for the sale of those properties. But she had, I bet, 4 or 5 houses in Mount Pleasant that she'd see it, and it came on the market, and she'd buy it. So sometimes that's where money came from. What else am I forgetting? Is there anything else you have a thought about or question?
What was it like being a pastor's daughter in those days? You came as a teenager.
I did. It was not easy being a preacher's kid. I just remembered recently, I said I went to SUNY Albany when it was a teacher's college, and I remember being at a party and somebody said, does anybody have a church key? And I said, I do. And they meant a bottle opener for a beer. And I said, I do. And they looked at me and they said, what do you do, carry it around in your purse? And I said, well, I use it sometimes. Finally, we concluded that wasn't a church key, which I had. But, you know, I've never forgotten that, and I'm on in years now because I was so embarrassed. I can still remember my mother. I'd have a date, and I'd come home, and I'd be sitting in the car, and when I finally came in the house, she'd say, I don't like you sitting in that car. What will the neighbors think? Now, maybe that isn't specifically preacher's kid. Maybe any mother would have been that way. And then if I came inside with my date or my future husband, she'd say, Bob stayed an awful long time last night. You know, what will the neighbors think? And I thought, oh, dear, I don't care what they think. And I didn't. There was another rector at St. George's lived across the street, you know, but he didn't have any kids. He was married, but he didn't have any kids. I thought, lucky kid.
So how long was your father the pastor here?
I'm trying to think.
1946, 1964.
Was that it? Or was your,
Looked at it, I
oh,
think that was what it said.
okay, because, yeah, I remember when he got up and said, I am going to be retiring, and I want to say that he said, you know, I'm over 70, and he was, like 73, 74, and everybody was so surprised because he didn't look his age, he never did, and he was very outgoing, you know,
Yeah.
did
Yeah,
his thing,
yeah.
yeah. But my mother was a typical minister's wife, and I say typical. Things would bother her. She'd come, and even after my dad died, and somebody would bring her to church here. If she saw a bit of dust anywhere, and you know, I knew what it was. It was her feeling that she didn't want the neighborhood to think that Italians were dirty people. That's something she lived with. You know, she grew up in New Jersey, and I still remember the story. She was born in Brooklyn. My grandfather was a tailor, and he moved his family to New Jersey. My grandmother was out sweeping the sidewalk, and the neighbor stopped and said, "Are you my new neighbor?" And she said, "Yes, I am." And she said, "Oh, I'm so glad. I heard Italians were moving in." And my grandmother looked at him and said, "That's me." Now, my grandmother was American-born. She had no accent when she talked.
Right.
But that was the kind of thing people faced. You know, I heard Italians were moving in. Well, my grandfather kept that house spotless. And did too. But that happened to a lot of people.
Yeah.
They just couldn't deal with that. I had an Italian name, so that made me Italian. I met, when I first moved to Kingsway Village, Dick Clow was there, and he went to State Street Presbyterian Church. And he said to me, "I always thought you were Catholic, and that's why I never asked you to go out." And I said, "You never asked me to go out anyway, you know." And he said, "But I thought you were Catholic because your Italian name." I said, "Well, sorry, you're lost, you know."
Yeah. That's right.
But I don't know. It's an interesting thing. You all keep this building up so beautifully. You should be commended for that, because it's, you know,
We're proud of it.
yeah, it's wonderful. Yeah. I don't even think I was here when it first went up. It's funny, too, because I often say to my twins, you know, you boys were baptized in that church. But my Craig, I lived in Virginia at the time, so he was baptized down there. But they kind of laugh about it. But they take their kids for a ride around when they come to visit. And my Matthew will say, "I'm just a town boy, Mom," you know, and he drives past here. I used to live on Lancaster Drive when they were little. They sometimes remember that. So, I don't know. I'm running out of thoughts.
Well, from looking at the pictures, when the sanctuary was made, the narthex was built along with it. So the educational, the two-story part was added?
That's right.
Okay.
But, you know, you used every nook and cranny for a Sunday school thing. There was a woman who was just such a faithful person, Minnie Skatine.
Yep.
Oh, did you all know Minnie?
We know of her.
You know of her. And she was such a good Sunday school teacher. So good. Loved the kids. They loved her back. And dedicated. Just a good person.
So how many kids would there be in Sunday school in those days?
Not a lot that I remember. Probably. She probably. I didn't know that, but that sounds like something she would have done. Sure. By the way, on the table out there is a beautiful framed stained glass. What is that? That's gorgeous.
It was a gift from someone. It wasn't from a church, I don't think. But it's so beautiful. I can't remember now who gave it to us.
No, I thought it was from another church.
Was it?
Yeah, it's from another church, but I don't know.
She offered it to us, and
It's pretty. It's just lovely. Yep.
Yeah, we just did that.
We found some plans to talk about whether a wing go along that side. Do you know anything?
I don't remember that.
Sort of balance, it was going to balance that. I don't know if we're going to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't remember that at all. Yeah, you know, as I said, I've been in and out so many times. I have never lived here a very long time. And
So when it was built, most of the city people came out here for
That's
church
right.
on Sunday.
That's right.
And then they must have probably moved out here, some of them.
Very few of them moved out here.
Really?
Yeah.
So they didn't mind coming out to this?
I remember Linda Rodriguez
Yeah.
lived here, but I can't remember her married name. She was a phys ed teacher in Burnt Hills, I remember that.
Do you remember that?
But she lived out here, of course, but she married. Linda Rodriguez.
Oh,
What's her name's daughter? Gilda's daughter.
Gilda's daughter.
Gilda's daughter, Linda.
okay.
These folks were around when Rick and I came, probably the same time as the girl groups about, right? We saw these people occasionally.
Yes.
And so at least we got to figure out, and who's the gentleman who just died in recent times, who used to come once a month? A Scatini.
David Scatini.
Oh,
David,
David,
yeah.
but not recent. It's been a few years.
Yeah, he died, but
Yeah.
we got to meet some of those folks, the Wheelers and Palmers and Hayeses.
That's right.
They were like 10 years before us, so they got to meet a lot of these folks.
And you remember things. I was not worshiping here, came from out of town, but Carolyn Statler
Oh,
used to have
She's why we can't.
yeah.
used to have a phenomenal choir. And remember the programs, the things, the concerts they put on?
Yes.
Unusual. And I remember once there was a need for an organist. I played that organ for a time, and I remember I got $50 a month, and that was my money.
Yeah.
I used to say about Ramsey, that's my money, and I would buy clothing with it. I sewed sometimes, but that's terrible. But they needed an organist, and you begin to say, who do I know? Who do I know? Fred White was an engineer at GE, and my sister Lydia, and we grew up with them in Michigan.
Oh.
His sister Nancy Jane was my best friend. We have all lived on Burns Avenue. And Lydia kept up with him and asked him to come and play. Well, you know, he plays big pipe organs. He said, I'll do it. And he was here for I don't know how many months, but really an accomplished organist. And he was playing that little Baldwin electronic organ, which it's small. It had a lot of stops, but that was his thing. And it worked.
Who's the man that plays the piano at Kingsway for the worship services?
That's David Holden, and he played here at one
Right.
time when my dad was pastor.
Yeah.
He used to play here.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
He was
And he was young. He was newly married and didn't have any children. And
So he's in his 90s?
no. He's younger than I am. 80s. He's 80s. Yeah.
Dottie, do you know when that organ got here that you were one?
Does that have something to do with Jeanette Storch, that organ?
Don't know. Okay.
I want
It
to.
was here when Jen and I joined in 90. So.
That specific organ.
Yeah, the organ was here in 90. So. Okay, I didn't know that.
That's a very nice piano, too. But-
When we came, Carolyn Statler told us, Rick knew her from work, that we had to come. We moved to Burnt Hills, we had to come here. Don't even look around, we have to come here. And I was so fascinated when I learned about the history, growing up Italian in an Italian neighborhood, everybody Catholic. It just blew my mind, that they had the Italians had the audacity, really, to say, you really don't want us anyway, so we will become Protestant, because that's where the outreach came from. And it's just such an inspiring story.
Well, people often ask me, how come my dad was a Presbyterian minister? You were Italian,
Right.
It doesn't work. But I remember so vividly when he came to this country, his father had already been here, and his father became Presbyterian. Again, missionary thing, somebody was doing something.
Yeah.
And when my dad came with his mother and maybe 4 or 5 of the kids, they joined my grandfather. And my dad said he remembered going to Mass with my grandmother and then going to Sunday school in the Presbyterian church with my grandfather.
Oh.
When my grandfather died, and it was not too long after that, my grandmother said, I am not staying here. And she took them all to go back to Italy. And my Uncle Joseph was older. He had been educated. He taught high school in Pennsylvania. He said to my grandmother, let Frank stay with me. I will see to his education, which he did. And she let him stay. He was about 17 then. But he saw him through high school, and he saw him through college. and seminary. So, and those were the years when you needed a 2-year college degree, and then you could go to seminary. And my mother, who was not a well-educated woman, said to him one day, "Frank, you better get your degree, because there's going to be a time when the Presbyterian Church will require you to have a degree before you go to seminary." So he finished up at NYU, because they were living in New York City at the time. And that's...
So did his mother and siblings ever come back to the
Nope.
U.S.?
No. But I have been to Italy several times, and my aunt, Madilena, when I was leaving, gave me a package all wrapped up. And she handed it to me, and she said, "I made this for you, and I'm giving it to you with all my heart." In perfect English. And I thought, what? And then I remembered she had lived here as a young person. She learned English. So when she spoke it, there was no accent. I kind of nudged Frank, because we were visiting them in Italy, where my dad grew up, in perfect English.
Where did he grow up?
In Brescia,
Which is where?
northern Italy, Lombardy region. And he's really the only Protestant I have an Aunt Barbara had, who was a nun. And Dad and Mom went to Italy one time, and when they came back, my father said, "I had the most wonderful time with her. We sat under a tree and we just talked." And it was wonderful. There was no animosity. You know, you left the Catholic Church and you became this minister.
Yeah.
So it was nice.
It's really a cool story.
It is. It is. I really realize the older I get how blessed I am with the way I was raised. I have to tell you this story. I think you were there when I was telling Jonathan. My son Matthew, his wife is Jewish, and they have raised all the children Jewish. So when my Chelsea was bat mitzvah, I went down to Pennsylvania for the service. And, you know, that's not my faith. It's hers. And the rabbi finished up all the whatever stuff went on. And he said, "Oh, I've got to talk to Chelsea for a minute." So they turned around and faced the bimah. I don't know what he said to her. And then he turned back and he said, just look, "May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you." Well, I lost it. And my daughter-in-law's aunt said to me, "Dottie, are you okay?" I said, "I'm more than okay. My father was a Presbyterian minister, and that was his benediction every Sunday." It was like he was up there saying, "It's okay, honey. I love you. You're a Jewish little girl." That's fine.
That is so nice.
Yeah, it was very touching, and I've never forgotten it. And recently, when she came to visit, I told her the story, and she said, "Oh, just a minute, Graham," and she got her little notebook out, and she wrote the prayer down. And I said, "I know it's from the book of Numbers." Well, her father's on his phone, clicking around, and he gave the exact place, Numbers, blah, 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 blah. This is crazy.
That's so nice, though, that he did.
Yeah.
Dottie, when they moved up here, did they continue with some of the tie-in services?
No.
Were they still going on in Schenectady at that time? Or?
They may have stopped by then. And do you have one of those little hymn books around in storage anywhere? It's a little tiny hymn book, no music, just words, English on one side, Italian on the other. So it was an encouragement to people when they were singing, try to sing the English. You know, that's how you become assimilated, when you're speaking the language.
That's right. We should try this.
Now we go the other way to try to recapture.
Well,
I haven't seen the
it might be in that storage near the furnace. Isn't there stuff in there? Oh, yeah. Because somebody gave it to the church probably, and they never say no to anything. Right?
Yes.
Yes.
Do we know the combination?
I don't think right?
Oh, really?
And it's so heavy, you can't really get rid of it, huh?
Do you have any particular memories of your father, like, I don't know, in the sermon, like how he did it, or like when he
I don't. I have memories of encounters he and I had, but for instance, I went to Mount Pleasant High School, and I was president of the French Club. And the clubs in the high school would sponsor dances on Friday night. Well, it was the French club's turn to sponsor the dance. Now, Dad never said anything about don't dance. Dancing's not good. but I was not encouraged. So I went to him and I said, I feel like I have to be there Friday night because the club is sponsoring the dance and I'm president, blah, 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 blah. And he said to me, after we talked, honey, you do what you think is right. So I went. And I don't think he thought I was going to do that, but he never said a word to me about it. I still remember him saying, honey, do what you think is right. So,
Nice.
yeah.
Lucy, did you ever worship in this church?
Sure.
As a child before you got married and went to college, were you worshiping here?
Yep, I did. And as I said, my former husband, Bob Ramsey, was an elder here. I mean a trustee. So we worshiped here, did our thing together, and the kids.
In your youth, though, I lose track of the timeline. So these churches built in what, 45 or 46?
No.
60.
60 what?
60, okay.
Yes.
And you were, how old were you in 64?
How old? I was born in 32.
Okay.
So 30-something?
Okay, all right.
Yeah, 32. I was 32.
Yeah, so not a child. You had a family.
Yeah.
So when you sat through our service today, was it the same basically as what you
Well, when I sat through, first of all, I think you have a blessing here in Jonathan. I hope you know that, but because I just am impressed. One of my residents at Kingsway is Adrian Westfall, and he was at Trinity Reform
Yes.
for one time, and she just adores him.
Yeah.
And she said, some of us who were in that church at the time, and it had closed,
Yeah.
she said, we would always talk about coming to your church some Sunday. And so I told her I was coming today. She said, no, I didn't get the others. It was like 3 or 4 women who really enjoyed having him as their pastor. And so
He helped close it, right?
I think he did, yeah.
You know, you do it online. I can watch it online.
Yeah, they could watch it on YouTube.
Well, I watch it on YouTube.
Yeah.
Except a few weeks ago there was a problem.
Yeah, sometimes there's a problem.
Yeah, I've enjoyed being able to do that.
Yeah.
It's why I haven't been here in a long time.
Well, it works for people.
Yeah,
It's great.
that's a good mission.
Yes. One good thing came from COVID.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to think of something else to say.
Do we have any more questions?
When did Dick Keith start? He was after your dad, right? That's the person who came
He
in.
was the first person. Then there was a Dana Lindsley,
Yeah.
and I'm trying to
Who
remember.
was here before McCaffrey? Did you know? Who's the last person?
I should know that.
Yeah.
So, Dottie, we hear stories about, I guess, 70s and 80s when Session had to vote, we'll pay this bill and we'll hold off on that bill. Was any of that going on when your dad was going on through the 60s here when you moved out here?
Probably. I always look at Trinity. It's been an interesting thing. It hasn't ever shown a big growth spurt because you get new members, but then GE would transfer some out, so you'd lose them, and it always kind of stayed about the same, is my impression.
Yeah.
Even when I was here, it just. But I don't think about. I'm just trying to think. Well, I think any church, and I don't care how big you are, has financial problems, and which bills are they going to pay?
Yeah.
Well, like I say, Union Press was very unusual, because when they were getting ready to close, they had this big $1 million and one of the nice things was that money, when they went there, stayed separate. And that made me feel better, because if they had given it all to that very rich church downtown, I would have been angry. But they kept it separate, and it was where Haiti, where are you? Haiti, that's where the money came from, out of that money.
So what happened to the million? I probably should know this.
What?
So they were left with $1 million
Yep.
when they were closing? Does it go to Presbytery?
No, it doesn't, but Presbytery controls it. It doesn't go to them, but you can't just spend it. Because I kept thinking of that money being there, so I petitioned them. I don't know, how much was that? Do you remember? 1,000, 5,000, what? Yeah. I really sold it because I said there are 4 people from that church, because myself, I'm trying to think of who's here. Yeah, and the singer, what's her name?
Melissa.
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 No, no, no.
Jeanette?
No. She sings a soloist sometimes.
Jeanette.
No, it's not Jeanette. Though Jeanette came to our church because,
Sorry.
yeah, but
Yes.
why am I not thinking of her name? She's a cutie. Her husband or her boyfriend has the oatmeal or oats.
Abby?
Abby, thank you. Yeah, isn't her name? No, Abby, I think.
You know, I've been on the personnel committee at Presbytery, which Kara had been long. And she told me a meeting a month, nothing really happens. Guess what? It's like so busy now. But I'm learning about how much money Presbytery has, and I never really get a straight answer about, well, what's going to happen to it? These, churches have been sold.
Don't forget it's there, too, because I think there are times when you might conceive of a project that's a big one, and you petition them for the money.
Yeah.
And they really need to give it to you. I mean, there should be no excuse.
Really?
Yeah, that's my own feeling. That's my own feeling. I have to tell you, apropos, I don't speak Italian, but it's kind of been an interesting thing. When I went to SUNY Albany, I majored in foreign languages, French and Spanish.
Oh.
And somebody would say to me, you got a good accent. And I thought, well, yeah, I've been hearing this Italian all my life.
That's right.
But there we were.
Very, very interesting.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's a long time since someone told me a story.
I feel like there's probably a lot more that could be told, but it's not coming to me right now.
That's okay. You've given us bits and pieces through the years, individually, like after service.
And we know where to find you. So
We know where to find you.
And I'm not going anywhere.
So cool that you still drive.
Well, that's probably going to end soon. They go way back to one quick little thing that has to do with, I was thinking of a Christmas tree. When this church was built, they really need to landscape it. And Amy Lemaire, who was a very well-known, what will I call her, horticulturist in Schenectady. In fact, in Central Park, there are signs to her.
Yeah.
Got involved with the women's group here, and they're the ones that did all the landscaping that goes around here. With her help, she would have certain shows that people had to pay money for, and she'd give them money. She'd buy some of the stuff. Wow. She was really a very good help.
So good to know.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for asking me.
That was wonderful. No, you have so much in your head, and we want you to share it. That was great.
Well, life has been good.
Any interesting traditions that Trinity had in the early days maybe got lost along the way?
Around holidays.
Celebrating the holiday things. We always did this at Christmas. We always did this at Easter.
Do you know what I remember?
What?
Years ago on J Street, Children's Day was big in the Protestant church. Kids had little pieces and they memorized them and so on. I used to go to where Linton High School is now, in Schenectady, was a field, and daisies were growing wild. I used to go with my father, and we'd spend hours cutting down daisies. Then at church, this is terrible, there was a picket fence that went up around the DS, whatever you call it, and behind it were glass jars with water in it, and all the daisies were all the way along, and then they were poking their nose out of the picket fence. It was the prettiest thing to see, and the kids felt very special.
So maybe daisies. Yeah. Maybe we should adopt a flower. Seriously. Yeah, a hollyhock daisy.
Well, and I didn't say, did I, that I've been married twice. My first marriage, I was married on J Street, and there was no center aisle. And that bothered a lot of brides.
Yeah.
She didn't have an aisle to walk down. Didn't bother me at all. My wedding was beautiful, and it was in that building.
Yeah. So it was okay.
Yeah.
So do you always have an Advent dinner around Christmas?
No, I don't think we ever did. I don't remember.
Wow, because that's
That's a
our
biggie, yeah,
traditions.
yeah.
Yeah. So daisies and what's the other flower? You
Hollyhocks.
got to remember this.
I've never seen any hollyhocks around. Do they still exist?
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Yeah? They grow wild? Oh, do they grow wild? Yeah.
No, they're an annual.
No, they're perennial,
Yeah, I know. There were always tons of
and they're,
hollyhocks.
but they're tall, so.
Yeah, very tall. Very tall.
So maybe we can
Very colorful.
along the fence or something. I wonder if they need a lot of sun.
I don't remember if that was the sunny. You know, that old church on J Street was so big that it wasn't all used. You could go upstairs over the Sunday school area, upstairs, and there was this huge room. Finished. No finished, nothing. It was empty. What did you say?
But there was a floor.
A floor. And there was stuff stored up there.
Wow.
And it was just collecting. No Sunday school class went up there. Yeah, kind of interesting.
Well, thank you, dear.
Thank you for asking me. This was great. It was fun.
So cool. I'm going to give it to. Oh, I have to email it to Wayne.
Thank you.